Is this thing on? Hey, has anyone seen Camp Director Chris? He mentioned going off to write something, but that was at least a week ago. Also, has anyone seen The Nurse?
Hello and welcome to Bunk 237, a horror movie podcast. It is the only horror movie podcast that I am one of the hosts of. I'm Robin.
And I'm Tuyet, the other only host.
Nailed it.
And our guest today is Roger Ouellette, horror fan and political speechwriter. Hi, Roger.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. We're
What
excited to have you
up?
on the podcast.
I'm very excited that you're here because I know that you're a big Stephen King fan, and today we're talking about Misery.
Yeah.
It came out in 1990. Good old 1990, which was 30 years ago.
That's fucked up.
Crazy. James Caan plays famous author Paul Sheldon, and Kathy Bates is Annie Wilkes, his number one fan / attempted murderer and torturer. I love this movie for so many reasons. But I want to know what you guys thought of it. Roger, I want to know how it fits in your Stephen King universe.
Yeah.
Because I know that you're a fan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Stephen King fan, and I kind of came to this one a bit later in my first readings, and then, but for me, my history with Misery, my initial introduction to it is every Halloween AFI would do those. Those
Yes.
100 thrills or 100 scariest moments and stuff like that. And I remember as a kid watching that and seeing the hobbling scene and just being like, oh, absolutely not. Never gonna watch this. And so I just I knew it as this this story that where this incredibly violent thing happens, and so I avoided it for so long. And then a couple of years ago, a mark of how cool my life is, I started a book club with my mom, and
I love that so much.
and it's
That's
just
really cool.
it's just me and my mom. So shout out to Linda. And we read this one together, and I just thought it was it's a great story. And then when Rob Reiner took over to make the film with William Goldman and just a crazy cast of the most famous people in Hollywood.
Crazy, not only crazy cast of the most famous people in Hollywood, but my personal favorite people. Rob Reiner and William Goldman have made my favorite movies of all time. Together, The Princess Bride, and then Rob Reiner, When Harry Met Sally, Spinal Tap. He's everything.
And then he
And
made
it's
Misery.
And then he made Misery, yeah.
Which I think is incredible. I didn't watch this movie when it came out. I was 8 for one, but
Right.
I didn't see it until much later. And specifically, I saw it for the first time earlier, all the way through, earlier this year on an international flight. So I watched it on this tiny screen, flying
The way
across
it's meant
the
to
ocean.
be seen.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it's how all movies should be.
You really
seen.
get the full effect of
Yeah.
that
Edited
overhead shot of Annie Wilkes looking down at you when
Yeah.
you're on a plane.
Yeah, and surrounded by people and kind of trapped. I think it's perfect. I think it's great. And I loved it. I thought it was so good. And I had always kind of meant to watch it, but somehow just sort of missed the boat on it. And I think there was also, it was so popular, I think, and in the sort of consciousness of, throughout the 90s, I felt like I already knew what the movie was about, from parodies on SNL and all, everyone knew about the hobbling scene. That was whether or not you saw the movie, whether or not you liked horror, if you were alive in the 90s and had a television, you were aware of this scene, even just by proxy. And it was, so I think maybe because of that is probably why I didn't necessarily seek it out as something to watch. but now coming across it I love it. I think it's everything I ever heard about it is true. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Kathy Bates is incredible.
Oh, so good. I think I went through a Stephen King phase, I think toward the end of middle school, early high school. And I don't know, Roger, how your mom felt about it, but my mom loves this story so much. I don't think she's ever read the book, but she loves the movie. And I think when I was going through this phase, I was reading The Shining, I was watching The Shining, I was reading Carrie, I was watching Carrie, and she was like, oh, you got to put Misery on the list. And it was one of the shorter Stephen King books. So I remember just reading it and watching it and just being like, yep, that's a classic.
Yeah.
Instant classic.
Classic question. Now, I have not read the book, but both of you have. Also, Roger's mother.
Should I call Linda? We'll get her on.
Yeah, I would please have her call into the show. That would actually be pretty amazing. You know what? We'll get a postscript from her later. Yeah. So, having read the book and watched the movie, do you think the book is better? That's the thing that is always true about most adaptations.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I generally will like the book more than the movie, but I think they're sort of their own independently brilliant. I think what the book does is it focuses a lot more on, at some point, Paul determines that he's gonna write the great American novel while he's challenging himself to make Misery Returns the best thing. And he's also, they kind of amp up that he's is a former addict and he's struggling with addiction to Novril, the sort of fake drug that they have in there, and it talks a lot more about that. But I think the movie just sort of boils down all that sort of that psychological horror that King does so well in his writing. It kind of boils it down to just the true terror of being kind of trapped by this woman who is just so incredibly ill.
Right. I think too what is so good about Stephen King adaptations is that often, and I say often, but I'm only thinking about The Shining as well, they change things just enough that it's surprising and terrifying in a whole new way if you've read the book before. The movie has a pretty fun comic relief in that police chief
Buster.
Buster and his long-suffering wife.
Buster, who is somehow the amalgamation of Barney Fife and Sherlock Holmes in one.
Yeah, when he would see that broken branch, he's the greatest detective alive.
I love the little scene preceding that when his wife is trying to put her hand on his leg
in the car. Yeah,
and it is incredible that he stops her and is in this car, you're my deputy. And it's she's the general comic relief in the movie, I think throughout, those little scenes, I think Paul's sarcasm in the face of terror is fantastic. The way he continues to sort of give Annie a little bit of shit, even though she's physically torturing him and keeping him from his family and his life, and has basically kidnapped him. But the fact that he can still joke with her is some kind of Stockholm syndrome, almost a little bit, that I really feel would be how I would be if I got kidnapped. I'm too much to not somehow joke about in a terrible situation.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that also is something that ratchets up how terrifying this movie is. He can get away with moments of patronizing her, making fun, and she'll just be like, "Oh, you fooler," and then there'll be other moments when she's just being genuine, and then she launches into a tirade, and it's that sort of unpredictability where you're just every time she comes in the room, she's you don't know what she's either going to snort like a pig, profess her undying love to Paul,
right.
or threatened to light him on fire, or and then the hobbling scene. Like, you just never know. Every time she comes in the room, you're just like, okay, all right, here we go. Let's see.
But it's like, it's every time she comes in the room, but it's also every time she leaves. Because then she gets in the car, and you're like, you don't know when she's coming back. You have no idea how long she's gone. And you're like, for God's sakes, do not leave the room. Like, he's like...
You could come back with anything. And
he's like diving off of the bed, and it's like, Paul, what's your plan?
Yeah.
There's... You're not going anywhere.
And I appreciate that as a horror movie and as a Stephen King horror movie, the big bad is not supernatural. It's just a woman who used to be a nurse.
One of my questions is if this movie could be made today, because she's so clearly like mentally ill, and it is not cool to blame, to depict mentally ill people as violent necessarily anymore.
Yeah, and on top of that, when she reads that Misery, the fictional Misery has died, and then she says, yeah, I wrote it down because I was just like, you dirty bird, how could you? I thought you were good, Paul, but you're not. You're just another lying dirty birdie, and I don't think I better be around you for a little while. That last part is like, oh my God, like, she understands also how ill she is, and she herself doesn't know the extremes in which she's going to take. She just knows that it could get really bad. And it comes back again when she's like, I might put bullets in this gun. Like, it's just... I
did think that if this movie came out now, or sort of thinking about this movie in the framework of today, I didn't think about whether or not it could be made, or how, or sort of its depiction of mental illness and mental health. But I did think about how this movie is basically, this movie predicted what Twitter would be. Because I think if you talk about like what celebrity culture is like on the internet and on Twitter, it is Annie Wilkes. Like the obsessive, like the most obsessive, loyal fan who just follows every single thing you do, listens to every word you say, and also fucking hates you. And I think that was such, like, this extreme fan is, I think, what we are seeing now on the internet. Yeah, the biggest stands.
There was one line that she had when Buster comes and asks her if she knows Paul Sheldon, and she says, I'm so proud of my Paul Sheldon collection. And you're just like, because he's in the basement.
You know what else like really terrified me about the visual of the Paul Sheldon collection was that picture with best wishes, because of Paul, and it shows like that they've interacted in the past in some way, in such a passive way. Like, they don't explain it. Maybe she wrote a letter and he sent something. Maybe it was at a convention or a reading or something like that. But it's never explained. You don't know. And it just on one hand, you're just like, oh my God, they've somehow interacted in the past in such an impersonal way, and now they are interacting in the most personal way possible.
I love that she's always been there. She has always been that fan. What did you guys think of the backstory of her murderous nurse career, or like her like that reveal at the end? Because I think in the beginning it's just like, oh, she's just sort of a kooky lady.
Yeah, it's sort of like
no, okay, that's too fair. She's very kooky, I should say, in the beginning.
I think it explains a lot. It does a great job of like giving some economy of story where, it's like the first thing is just like, oh, she killed her dad. Oh, okay.
And then somehow it goes up from there.
And then it just ratchets up from there. But that reveal was great because it also explains like why she's so isolated like this, and also it shows that a lot of factors went into creating the monster of Annie Wilkes, and you kind of get this idea that it's never really explained, but you can tell from even these newspaper clippings that there were people in Annie's life and in her formative years that betrayed her, And so being betrayed or being fooled and stuff like that just automatically triggers a violent response from her. So it's so many occasions during the movie. And I think like the reveal of those pages like really kind of delivers on that, on that, I think.
One of my favorite character scenes, and you brought this up briefly, Roger, was the snorting scene, like, which is very early on, and it's like right, like she comes into the room. She introduces Misery the pig. Excellent.
Did you notice in the credits? She's
Misery
credited
the
as
pig.
Misery the pig herself.
Yeah, I did. I looked up Misery the pig in IMDb just because I wanted to know.
Any other
That's
credits?
No, that's her one and only feature film, and I think she
Good for
crushed
her.
it. One and done. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to.
She's a cute pig.
Yeah, right? I think she knew this was her opus, and she was done, and she's gone back to civilian life. But that scene, there is the dialogue in that specific scene, like, killed me when she asked Paul, like, what's that ceiling that Dago painted? And he's like, nervously, like, the Sistine Chapel. And then she goes, yeah, that and Misery's Child. Those are the only two divine things in this world. And then she starts snorting and leaves. And when I watched that for this rewatch, the first thing that came up in my mind was a Maya Angelou quote, the one that's like, when people show you who they are, like, believe them.
Yeah.
And I was like...
I often thought of Maya Angelou while watching this movie.
I think the director made really smart choices in when to pan away and when not to. Really, they show the car crash, but they don't show like the crumpled bodies. You know, they show him like wincing in pain on the bed, but they don't. And they kind of show everything like afterward until they get to the hobbling, and when the camera doesn't pan away,
Move.
Oh, no.
just like when that foot bends,
Yep.
is like
That shot is
in
burned in my brain
throat.
forever.
Yeah. It just like the sound, the shot, her face, and just like and the perspective of the camera where you're essentially like his view of his own feet, and this happening is so good. It's so good.
And
this is why I love horror. let me see this. Give it to me.
We gotta talk about the hobbling because it is quite different in the book.
Oh, yeah.
What happens in the book?
Do you
Rob, you want to take this one?
So in the book, the hobble, it's been a while since I've read it, but the big difference is in the book, the hobbling is not it's not a hobbling at all. It's a clean cut with an axe, and he completely cuts off his leg below.
I did not know that you were going to say leg.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Pause for dramatic effect.
I was running through a lot of different things in my brain, and then you said leg. Okay.
Yeah, it cuts off his leg, and then immediately like takes it. What is it? A blowtorch, and cauterizes the stump. And then later on, he also loses a thumb.
Yeah. And there is a scene where she says she considered cutting off his man gland.
Yes, that's right. Just some real classic Stephen King.
Oh,
God, he's
Man gland is a very
Annie
fun way to
Wilkes's
say that.
vocabulary. Like, where did that come from? It is simultaneously the Stephen Kingiest Stephen King shit of all time, and also like completely random.
Because it almost does sort of sound like something like a child would say, right?
I mean,
a 12-year-old or something.
Yeah. I mean, I love him to death, but Stephen King is, like, notoriously known for, like, anytime he writes about, like, sex or human anatomy, it just becomes infantile, and you're like, have you ever had sex? Like,
what was more horrifying then? The hobbling? Like, what would be more horrifying? A hobbling or getting your foot cut off and then cauterized?
It's interesting because William Goldman really wanted to keep the slicing off of the foot in the movie, and I think Kathy Bates was on board to do it. Like everyone was really excited about it, and then the first director that they got was like, "I will not be doing that," and eventually exited the project because they could not come to a consensus about the hobbling scene.
Wow.
And then eventually, Rob Reiner. And, some other people said, you know what, we're not going to do it. And William Goldman, I think this is in one of William Goldman's books about all the screenplays he's written, said, threw a huge fit because he wanted to keep the scene. He was so pissed. He thought they'd ruin the movie. And then the second he saw the scene the way it is, he's like, nope, they were right.
Because I would say the visual of getting your foot bashed with a sledgehammer seems so much more torturous than just getting it cut off.
Yeah.
Right? Right?
Yeah, and it's such a different type of terror because it's just like once the foot's gone, it's gone. He's gonna pass out, and it's just
right.
And this is just like extent and just the visual of the foot is just
broken bones and this sort of floppy foot.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's like
as someone who has repeatedly sprained her ankles, that is like the worst image.
They made some choices to de-escalate some of the more violent stuff that happens in the book, which I think works. There is an insane moment in the book where Buster, spoiler alert, Buster is not in the book. Of several law enforcement.
He's not in the book.
He's he's an amalgamation of several like law enforcement characters. But in the book, there's a finally there's kind of like a Buster-like character that's like roaming around, and Annie ends up running him over with a lawnmower. And that's how the hope dies for Paul once again in that narrative. And I guess they filmed it, but they just they took
Oh, really?
they took it out because I saw that Kathy Bates did an interview where she was kind of sad that scene didn't make it in. But I think it's so.
I think it works the way it is, right? I think
it works the way it is.
Yeah, I think it has just the right amount of balance of violence and gore and suspense. Because I think where this movie really lives is in that suspense. Like Robin, you were saying, we have no idea what Annie Wilkes is doing at any time, but it always seems a little scary.
Right, and I think it's definitely squares more with her version of the character in the movie, and it's also like the gore is not the horror here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's her and her brain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what she's capable of, and I think that if that stuff was left in, not only would it have seemed over the top, but it wouldn't have aged well, probably in terms of what it looked like.
Yeah,
and I think it's also a testament to Rob Reiner's direction in that you don't realize that we're a half hour into the movie before Paul Sheldon sees the outside of his room, and the fact that you're so stressed out that entire time with him just laying in a bed, it's a real testament to those actors and into his direction. The first thing you see when they open the movie is the match and the cigarette. It's the first thing we see, and then ultimately that is Paul's salvation at the end of the that's how he gets out. And it's just I think there's just little brilliant strokes of genius by Rob Reiner that are that really help the story.
Rob Reiner apparently watched a lot of Hitchcock to prepare for this and was very influenced, which I think you can 100% see.
You could absolutely see that. Absolutely. There are all
those close-ups, those extended close-ups where you're like, oh, this is different.
Yes, yeah. Even the passing of time, or showing the passing of time through the winter, and as Paul is getting weirdly more comfortable or just used to being kidnapped.
And physically recovering.
And
stronger.
Yeah. And it's he goes through that winter, but then all the snow starts to melt and he starts to see that. And I did that transition there when he is still scheming in his brain, but he's also still trying to make the best of the situation and just trying to be also a writer. Like the indulgence of a writer who's like,
Man.
I guess I got to make this deadline.
Yeah, that montage of him writing away, clickety-clacking at the typewriter, I was like, oh man, I'm jealous.
Right.
Right? I think there was some like sick writerly brain of mine that was like, actually, I mean, having someone over me like that would probably get the best work out of me.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I wanted to bring up. Like, all of us come from a writing background and stuff like that. So as terrifying as the hoveling scene is, for me, equally the scene where she makes him burn his book is also just like the most horrifying thing I can think of.
Horrifying.
I wrote all these notes, and I have this just one section just entitled Paul's Hopeless Hells, and it's just like these like small moments when you just have, it's Paul is us in 2020, right? It's just like every time you just get a little bit of hope, it's just like, or you're scheming or something, or just like a little bit of hope, it just immediately gets taken away from you in the worst way.
Dashed every day. Like,
so true.
Right? Because like
it's the ultimate quarantine movie.
Right? Because like on the one hand, he just got like 30 beautiful pages down that he'll like fucking just like the best writing of his life. But then he tries to drug his kidnapper, and that doesn't work, and she spills the wine. And it's like
his face, too.
That disappointment on his
scene.
face when she innocently spills the wine. Like all of that work, and I could feel that, right? Can't you feel that, like those days, however long it was, days and weeks of saving those little pills, and just gone, and now you're stuck having this shitty dinner.
And I don't know if it is a question to me whether or not she sort of knew or not. And it also, I had another question,
it's not clear,
kind of related to that, just like how much does Annie know what's going on? Because when he goes out of the room and he sees the phone, and the phone is a shell, it doesn't have any inner parts, and like I think he calls her a crazy bitch or something like that. But it did bring up a question to me, is like, why would you have that out there if it wasn't for bait? Like if
right.
she must have known he was gonna like. I don't know. Do you think she knew that he was going to get out of there? Like, why have that phone out there if it's just a prop?
That's a good.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
this is and it brings up an interesting point, because in the book, there's the scene where she has threaded her memory book. That's right. And she's threaded the doors, and she suspects that he's been going out, and so she takes her human hair and puts it across the pages of her scrapbook and puts it across doorways and stuff, and comes back and sees that it's been snipped, like that it's been broken, and knows that he's gone out. So in the book, she's 100% convinced that he's leaving. And in my mind, I swore to God for until yesterday when I watched the movie that was in the movie, that scene was in the movie. I pictured the threads in the movie. Like I had that in my mind, and it just wasn't there. Instead, it was the little penguin statue, which is also in the book, exists in the book, but he puts it back the wrong way, and that's how she notices. So in the book, she very clearly knows that he's leaving or attempting to leave. In this one, it's not so. In the movie, it's not so clear. That she suspects him. She knows that he left once she finds the penguin statue.
Then do you think that
the wrong spot? But
do you think that maybe then the phone prop is sort of a nod to that idea in the book, because they didn't really bring that up as part of her character or her motivation in the movie, but knowing that, like, taking that from the book, they put in like a few clues to the fact that she might be that smart and might be that psychotic, in baiting him that way. Because you're right that there is no reason to have a fake phone within like
Yeah.
distance
The
of
fake
him.
phone is in the book too, except she glued the connection, the wall connection.
But is it just so that at the beginning there's some legitimacy to her story that like the phone is out?
She's
She's trying like she's
airs
like
of like
that.
being a normal person. Yeah.
And her answers
But I think
are so quick.
too, she's clearly isolated herself, so she doesn't want a phone. She doesn't want any contact with the outside world. Maybe she ripped out the insides one day because she got frustrated, or maybe she put it out there as bait. We don't know.
Because I think a lot of her personality is putting up these airs, because I think we know that she knows that she's a little off. Like, she is aware that her brain works in a little bit of a different way than other people's. And I think that her life is a lot of, like, living in this fantasy world in her brain where she's the hero and not the villain. But also in the real world having to figure out how to navigate that for herself. So I think that, like, there's probably things in her world that she does because she thinks that's what normal people do. Like, they have phones, but she doesn't actually need a phone because she doesn't talk to anyone. And I wonder if there's more of that, too, where things that she does because, I don't know, I guess having a pig is probably a normal thing. Just trying to think of other ways where she tries to fake being normal. Like buying the Dom Perignon is a pretty funny thing that she thinks that people do because she read that he did that at the, for his books.
Yeah, it's so hard to like try to pin down Annie Wilkes, and I think that's why when people say like who's King's greatest character, he's written hundreds of books and whatever, and people always come back to Annie Wilkes because it's like you can't really figure out what her next move is going to be or why she's doing it. And the only time that, and what I noticed, and it's done really well in the movie, is the only times that she is incredibly direct and honest is when she is at her lowest of lows, and she gives these monologues where she just sort of lays it on the table, like when she's like, we're gonna have to murder suicide and that's just how it's gotta be, like
right.
If you were in this scenario, if you were Annie Wilkes, who's your Paul Sheldon? Like, do you have somebody in media or anything like that you'd be like, yeah, I can make that work?
That is very interesting because there's a lot of writers that I like, but I don't know any that I want to torch. Like, I need them to like finish a thing, right?
Seems like a lot of excuses.
There would be a lot of people. All right, I will say this.
It seems like you have someone on
yeah,
mind,
it's
Roger.
probably Stephen King.
I would say this for other fans of his work. I would probably say George R.R. Martin to get the last of the books. We really need him to finish this series.
Somehow, I don't think that he would thrive in that situation. He's had a hard enough time finishing the books on his own time.
I'm thinking about writers I really like, and if I like kidnap them to force them into writing something, what would I want them? What would I want them to write? Who do I want to hang out with?
Anyone for legal reasons. But, maybe I could convince J.K. Rowling to rewrite everything, make her not racist and not transphobic.
I love the idea of making a successful
maybe she would understand eventually.
Rewrite things.
Kind of going on the writing thing, like. One of the most relatable parts was when he sits in front of a blank page and just types "fuck" like 10 times. It was just like I wrote a note. I was like, this is every writer's first page. Like the blank page is like the scariest part where you're just like, yeah. Like I couldn't tell if it was like him writing like fuck was because he was trapped or because he was sitting on page one.
I think it was both, right? I think it was both. I think it's like because I think in that moment it's the longest time until the deadline. Do you know what I mean? When you know like whatever, if your deadline's in 48 hours, that's like hour 48.
It's also like on one hand, a horrible situation that he's in, but on another hand, like, he's a writer with nowhere to be and a typewriter in front of him and all the time in the world, you know? That's like kind of an ideal situation.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the sort of like the metaphors that sort of hit you over the head, and I say that because he literally hits her over the head with the typewriter. And also, like, when she comes down on it, it's like ding. It's like, okay, and he uses his legs to trip her up. It's just like, why don't we take every like Chekhov's gun that we like, and we create
and then
this.
He hits her with the misery,
right? Yeah. That was she got killed
yeah.
by misery 3 times. It was like the first time when Paul makes her eat the burnt manuscript.
Yeah.
All right, he's like she's eating his words. We get it. And then the second time he bashes her with the typewriter and it dings because he got to the end of the line. We get it. And then he finally kills her by smashing her in the head with the statue of the pig, a callback to her actual pig named Misery. We get it.
It's just the pinnacle of storytelling.
It's like a Rube Goldberg machine of just symbolism. It's like I'm surprised like the penguin didn't come into play.
Right. Misery was almost a very different movie. There was a certain actress who turned down the role. William Goldman says that he wrote the part for Kathy Bates, but there was a certain actress who was offered it first who turned it down.
It's crazy.
This is like
and it is Bette Midler.
Ooh. I just had a whole flash of the movie.
Yeah.
But with like Bette Midler's face in place of Kathy Bates and a lot of more expressive jazz hands.
You definitely know that Bette Midler would have been like, I'm going to sing a Liberace song in this.
But also, there's a laundry list of actors who turned down the role of Paul Sheldon. And
who else turned it down?
When James Caan took it, he didn't even really enjoy himself in this movie.
De Niro,
The short list is Kevin Kline, Michael Douglas, Harrison Ford, Dustin Hoffman, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Richard Dreyfuss, Gene Hackman, Robert Redford, William Hurt, and Warren Beatty.
Wait, hold up. That's the short list?
Yeah, it's literally every... And you know what's
It's like
what's really messed up about this is basically was because no man wanted to be that passive to a female character for an entire movie.
Yep.
Which is just like...
That's fascinating.
To Warren Beatty's credit, he was very into the project and wanted to do it, but then Dick Tracy got in the way. And that's why he backed out.
That's how it always happens.
This actually leads into my first badge very well, which is the Dream Team badge, because it's just like all the best people in it has the movie and all the people involved have such like an old school Hollywood feel to it. Even though it was the beginning of the 90s, it felt such like Rob Reiner, William Goldman, Kathy Bates, James Caan. Come on.
Yeah, it feels like an actor's
Lauren
actor.
Bacall.
It feels like an actor's actor kind of cast, right? Like very, very studied traditional actors in a horror movie, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and it's an Oscar-winning movie too. It's like, when was the last time a horror movie?
I saw that it was
Oscar?
the first time a woman won the Oscar for a horror movie.
Probably one of the
Yeah.
last.
I was like, have there been others?
It's also the only Oscar that a Stephen King adaptation has ever won.
Really?
Wow. Oh, that's right, because like Shawshank went like 0 for 9 or something.
Shawshank went 0 for 7.
That sucks. That's
the only other one that was kind of in the running. What badge?
I wanted to award to Annie Wilkes the Pizza Hut Book It Award for her commitment to reading.
Yes.
That's great.
I have 2 merit badges for Annie Wilkes. One being best hobby for figurine collecting, and then
Nice.
the feats of strength merit badge, because she hauls him out of that snow like just right on the back.
It does.
I also have an Annie Wilkes badge. It's the Oogie Cockadoodie badge
Ugh,
for her superb vocabulary.
just
Just
oogie.
fucking crazy.
Oh, when the book's burning and she's just like, oh, jeepers. I have a merit badge for Buster's wife. It is the weirdest turn on badge. And also, like, I guess you could like call it the weirdest turn on / like horniest character badge, because she doesn't have a lot of scene time, but most of it is like, oh, we got to go find this missing person. Well, I'd rather be in the sack, like over the sack, and then the next time we see her, she's like, what, are you having an affair? Like, all right, lady, calm down. Like,
There's not a lot of things to do in the mountains, Roger. Thank you, Roger. This was great.
Thank you for your copious notes.
Yeah.
it
It was very insightful. All the stuff. It was great. It was great talk. Thank you so much for coming on.
No, I this was so much fun, and Misery is just like such a
I'm
good
so
one of Stephen King, and I was like just so happy to get the invite and talk about this crazy movie and book.
Oh, Roger, is there any way to get a hold of you on the internet? Say if
Anything you want to
someone
plug?
was listening to it and they were like, I want to know more about this guy. What
Yeah.
would you tell them?
Any online
Yeah.
forum that you'll be publishing?
my
your
misery
reviews?
notes. No, I'll just I don't necessarily have anything to plug, but I will say, I mean, if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter, but that's kind of where I hang out for my political stuff that I do. But if there's one thing that I'll sort of shout out is there's a couple organizations here in LA that are doing some great work during COVID times, especially among the unhoused community, and that's Ground Game LA and Street Watch LA. And so I would just tell people to, I wanted to plug that and tell people to sort of get involved with those organizations. They're doing a lot of stuff with restorative justice and housing security and things like that during COVID times. So that's what I'll plug, because I don't really have any. I don't have any.
Well,
I don't have any
we appreciate
manuscripts in the work quite right now.
I know
That's awesome.
a way to get that done real quickly.
Bunk 237, a horror movie podcast, stars Tuyet and Robin Zlotnick as the final girls of Bunk 237, and Chris Charpentier as camp director Chris. The show is produced by me, Shane Segura. Our theme song is written and performed by Dan Zlotnick, and our outro music is written and performed by Talene Khalid. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and it may be featured on an upcoming episode. Have a suggestion for a movie? Then follow us on Instagram at Bunk237Pod and Twitter at Bunk237. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded.